The long-awaited meeting between US President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping has finally taken place, and at first glance, it appears to mark the beginning of a thaw between Washington and Beijing. As correspondents from The Guardian and Reuters note, it was widely expected that this round of negotiations could become the turning point that ends months of global instability caused by the trade confrontation between the world's two largest economies. But while headlines are filled with words like breakthrough and historic agreement, the reality proved far more restrained. Despite Trump's own enthusiastic remarks that the meeting was fantastic and an agreement for the ages, no final documents were signed and no permanent framework was established. This is the key point. If there is no agreement on paper, there is no agreement at all. Expectations were enormous. After a series of escalations, from tariffs to rare earth minerals and threats of 100% duties, both leaders entered the talks under heavy pressure. Washington understood that without compromise, global markets could collapse and supply chains could break down. Beijing realized that further pressure risked internal stability and investment flows. During the meeting, which took place as part of the APEC summit, the two sides managed to discuss several key issues: rare earth minerals, agricultural trade, and the problem of fentanyl, which Trump has long linked to China. From the Chinese side came a signal of readiness to purchase American soybeans, which was positively received by agricultural markets. Analysts from the northern plains of the United States noted that soybean price bases had already improved ahead of the talks. On tariffs, Trump announced that duties on Chinese imports related to fentanyl would be reduced from 20% to 10%, which would lower the overall rate from China's side from 57% to about 47%. An understanding was also reached that China would continue exporting rare earth elements and that the US would not immediately impose 100% tariffs. However, the meeting ultimately fell short of expectations. Why? Because nothing was signed. There is no clear implementation plan, no timeline, and no guarantees. In other words, the two sides agreed only verbally and amid a temporary wave of optimism, but without commitments. Reputable media outlets and diplomatic insiders emphasize that the negotiations ended with a framework, not a deal. As The Guardian reported, the talks could end months of global economic chaos, but the contours of the deal remain vague. A Chinese official statement described the results as hard-won and stressed that both sides must ensure implementation. In Washington, officials highlighted that the next round of negotiations could take place in April, but the date, agenda, and conditions are yet to be determined. On the bright side, there are indeed tangible deals on soybeans and rare earth minerals. China agreed to purchase larger volumes of American soybeans, which is an important signal for US agriculture. Markets have already interpreted this as a positive step. Rare earth elements, critical for chip-making, batteries, and defense technologies, also remained outside an immediate export ban, a major concern in Washington. Yet one troubling fact remains. No formal deferral or cancellation of 100% tariffs has been recorded as a binding commitment. The threat of full tariffs remains on paper, a condition that could be activated or ignored. This means what we are seeing is not peace, but a truce. Yes, it can be said with confidence that a trade truce between the US and China has begun. But it is not the peace that markets and analysts hoped for. It is merely a pause, one that could be shattered by a single tweet from Donald Trump or a single decision from Beijing. One wrong move and the chain breaks. Diplomatic insiders note that China's purchases and cooperation on soybeans and minerals are a gesture of goodwill, but Beijing has kept all its strategic cards in hand. The United States, for its part, did not demand any legally binding guarantees, which makes the current arrangement rather fragile. If Trump had secured the signing of a framework agreement with enforceable assurances, he could have declared it a historic achievement. But at this point, flattering headlines do not reflect the real depth of the deal. Markets are reacting cautiously. Expectations were higher than what was actually achieved. American farmers are pleased with the soybean purchases, but analysts warn that the volumes will not significantly change the overall picture. Chinese authorities are satisfied to have avoided a rare earth export crisis, but still retain leverage over key US sectors. All this creates the impression that both sides are in a wait-and-see mode. For instance, in the case of soybeans, Analyst Martinson from the northern plains of the United States notes that China's purchases are the most modest gesture of goodwill we have seen ahead of negotiations. What comes next? The outlook is that if both sides maintain the status quo, markets will have some breathing space, supply chains may slightly ease, and fears of immediate tariff escalation could subside. But if either leader interprets this as weakness and reignites the trade war, the situation could quickly reverse. Analysts emphasize that as long as there are no signed documents, there are no guarantees. In summary, the meeting between Trump and Xi Jinping is an important symbol, but a symbol is not a contract. A meaningful gesture, yes, but without binding commitments. What we witnessed was a truce, not peace. And a truce between the United States and China is an unstable state. One sharp statement, one tweet, one leak, and things could return to escalation. So today we see a beautiful photo of the leaders, the energy of the meeting, the words of optimism, and emptiness behind them. Peace has not been secured, the round is not fully won, and the economy, markets, and supply chains remain at a crossroads. And yet, despite the outward restraint, the meeting between Trump and Xi Jinping was far more than a mere diplomatic gesture. It was a pause before the storm, a moment when both powers seemed to take a breath, assessing the damage and their strength. According to Bloomberg, behind closed doors, the sides discussed the idea of creating a temporary coordination council on trade issues, a kind of hotline between the White House and China's State Council meant to prevent further abrupt moves. However, for now, it remains only an idea that no one is rushing to formalize. Insiders from Asian financial circles report that the Chinese delegation arrived at the meeting with a much softer attitude than expected. One delegate, who spoke to the Financial Times on condition of anonymity, said, "We did not come to negotiate. We came to understand how far Trump is willing to go. After that, we can build a strategy." In other words, Beijing is not ready to surrender. It is preparing for a long game. Meanwhile, in the United States, the meeting is already being used as a political instrument. Trump, in his campaign speeches, calls it a victory of the American spirit and claims that China has understood everything. But behind closed doors, White House briefings sound different. Officials admit that the breakthrough has been postponed and that China continues to act cautiously, waiting for the 2026 elections. Analysts at CNBC note that Beijing does not want to make a deal with Trump. It is waiting to see who comes next. Symbolically, the final part of the meeting unfolded in rare silence. No applause, no camera flashes, no unnecessary words. The two leaders parted with cold smiles and firm handshakes, but their eyes said the same thing. This story is not over. The feeling in the air was clear. The real round is only just beginning.